All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandy Reyes. I'm the Chief Communications and Undergraduate Admissions Officer for Gallaudet University. I'm also serving as the moderator for today's panel. Today we'll be talking about gene editing and are we an endangered species? I first wanted to say that, I don't know if I wanted to say that I'm excited about today's panel. I'm more actually nervous and scared about having to talk about this topic and this issue. It is a great one that's before us. And we have our esteemed faculty who are joining us on today's panel to answer some of the important questions before us regarding this topic. And in the end, we will be closing with the Gallaudet University debate team. They just debated against Georgetown University a couple of weeks ago on the topic of should deafness be cured? And we had the affirmative and the negative keynotes who will be wrapping up today's panel. So what had happened that has led us to where we are today and what prompted today's discussion. This is the first conversation that we're having. Actually, there was one that took place 6 years ago about this topic. And I remember reading a couple years ago about the scientists who in Russia who talked about the fact that there was an embryo that a couple was looking to be able to have gene editing done to. And that was for a deaf child. And in our recent media, we also have China and the Harvard Medical School who had announced that they wanted to restore, and they were successfully able to restore the hearing of 6 individuals or 6 children. And we've also seen media talking about an 11-year-old boy named Assam who has the otoferlin gene, and they were able to edit the gene in order to make him hearing, though his brain is not processing language in a way that a hearing child who's born hearing would. So oftentimes the media will say that these are remarkable events. They are groundbreaking events, in fact. But my question to all of us here today is it really? So to talk about this further, and in more depth, we have Dr. Derek Braun, who's a professor in the biology department, who's been studying the area of genetics, and that is his expertise. And again, this conversation is really important to have, especially when we're thinking about what's happening in labs all around the world. It's about us and our community, and decisions are being made about us with the work that they're doing. However, we're not present. We are not in those labs. We are just simply not there. So as a part of this conversation, I think it's also important to remind ourselves about the fact that we have a history that's before us. And it's a dark history, in fact, that we don't often talk about. When we think about the world, it has for centuries been trying to fix, cure, or eradicate deaf individuals. And to talk about that specifically, we have Dr. Brian Greenwald, who's a professor in the history department. Thank you for joining us. And when we were arranging today's panel, we realized that the community needs to understand this from different perspectives, genetically and biologically about what's possible, but also to understand the history that predates us, and then to be able to have a philosophical discussion. I think that's a very important part of this topic and what we're looking to do today. So for that reason, we have Dr. Teresa Blankmeyer-Burke, who is a professor in the philosophy department and a bioethicist. All right, so are you all ready for the first question? So the first question is for Dr. Derek Braun. I know that there's been a lot of media regarding gene editing and the advancements that they're able to do with gene editing on deaf genes. So can you talk about what we see happening in the next 5 years and what that might look like?
What a big question. Thank you for asking. There is a lot that has happened in the most recent news when it comes to gene therapy. It's not a new idea. It has something that's been considered for a while, where we're trying to cure things like cystic fibrosis, which is a disease of the lungs, and they've tried to cure that through gene therapy, and they've done so to some success. Some of the things that are changing quickly now are the improvements in technology. The CRISPR technology is a few years old now, and CRISPR allows the gene editing to really happen within the genes and to continue to happen without changing. And it's important that you mention scientists are now working on editing deaf genes. There was a couple that raised this, and an international community has come together to say no, that this is not a practice that needs to happen. What's a little different now is in clinical trials, you'll see the Eli Lilly has been making a product that is specific therapies for ear and genes and therapies related to hearing for those who are already living. They inject those into the ear, and that is the form of gene editing they're using now. And they've done so to some success. I would say that they don't have 100% access to hearing. They've got about a 50% or so improvement in their hearing status. And most recently in the news, what is new for us, I think, coming in the future, we will see many more attempts at editing genes, specifically deaf genes, which there are about 100 of, and they will each require their own specific edit in order to develop products for them. My sense is that pharmacology companies are going to come into this arena, and once there's a model that works through clinical trials, those pharmacy companies will take over and it will become proprietary. Because these are for-profit businesses, my imagining is you won't hear much more about it in the coming future because it will become proprietary. Now, will this work? It depends on the gene and how much can be fixed. They are doing so with some success, and they are doing so with some failures as well.
So can you talk more about your thoughts on Connexin 26? I know that a large population of the deaf community has that as a gene that's inherited. So can you talk a little bit more where we are as it relates to Connexin 26?
Yes, it's a really interesting question when it comes to the deaf community. About half of those who are genetically deaf have Connexin 26. There is one copy. You get a single copy but from each parent and determines your status as to whether or not you would be deaf or hard of hearing. Changes to the ear and structurally can mean that if you add a gene into the ear, does not necessarily mean that you will be cured or that you will be hearing. It's a hit or miss process, and the future remains to be seen on what those attempts and outcomes will look like.
Thank you, Dr. Braun. All right, so I do want, that's talking about what is really lies ahead in the next 5 years, but I would like to now look back throughout our history and ask the next question of Dr. Brian Greenwald. Can you talk a little bit more about the brief historical overview on eugenics and what this means for us today?
Thank you, Brandy. It's a pleasure to be here and with my esteemed colleagues. Well, that's quite a question, and it's a huge question that I have very little time to answer. But in short, eugenics would be described as, and by its modern definition, it actually has roots in the 19th century, in the latter part of that. And the idea originally comes to us from England, from this gentleman named Francis Galton, who was an Englishman who was a polymath in mathematics and a number of other studies, and it did a great deal of important work. He was a cousin to the famous scientist Charles Darwin. Now, Galton was very concerned about social problems of his day, developing then in England, alcoholism and crime and poverty. And Galton wanted to find a way to improve English society on the whole. And so he came up with this term and coined the term in 1883, coming from the Greek eu, meaning good or well, and genic, meaning born, so well born, bringing those of good stock, so to speak. And so the idea was that each person that came to with good stock, good inherited traits, should marry someone else who had good inherited traits, and their children would necessarily be better. And so was a proponent of selective coupling to improve the race, as he would say. And the idea of the time, the idea came over to America in 1907 and really found a receptive audience here and what became widespread. And so it affected teachers, policymakers, and many became advocates of eugenics. And much of this was well-intentioned in hopes of improving American society and weeding out what we would eventually call the undesirables, right? And that was the notion. We would weed them out, but we would, because of the problems we were seeing, right? And so this was a popular idea of the time. And when many immigrants came over to the U.S., many were coming from Southeastern Europe and occupying cities like New York and Chicago. And there were a lot of social problems that came, as well as illnesses that came with large waves of immigration, loss of jobs, and other social problems of the day. One of the ways that eugenics had in mind to control populations was to address this, and by sterilization. Now, the underlying idea was to make America a better country, a better society through better health. But this became a great problem in the U.S. when we had, sterilization laws passed in that day to start to control populations. And eventually, the idea of sterilizations would recur in Germany in the Nazi German era, in which they had forced sterilizations and genocide of it in that day of disabled persons, including deaf people, were killed or eliminated. Now, and that's a eugenics in a nutshell.
Wow, thank you for sharing, Dr. Greenwald. That is a bit heavy in terms of all of what's there. My next question is for Dr. Blankmeyer-Burke. Now, when we look at gene therapy, I know that this is another step along the path of using genetic technology to cure or address human variation. So how is this different from the attempts to cure deaf people in the past? Is this an existential threat to our signing deaf community?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here today with my esteemed colleagues. I greatly appreciate it. These are huge questions. And the question you've asked me is very difficult to answer, especially in brief, but I will do my best. We do have a history of trying to, quote unquote, fix deaf people. That is nothing new. And there have been attitudes along the lines of eugenics in the past. There have been also approaches in the way that we educate children through religious means or otherwise to try and use social institutions to address the experience of being deaf. And there have been medical interventions in the past as well. There have been a number of treatments that have tried to varying levels of success or what they would view as success. But we're now delving into a new area, genetics, and that means that the changes will have a more significant impact. It's an actual, quote-unquote, fix to not really the mechanical problems of the ear, but with actually, for example, there would be the opportunity to replace an eardrum, for example, but this is doing editing at the gene level. So then we have to think about what that means for us to continue to exist as a people. And this is different than other treatments. One point that is important to consider is the impact on deaf communities in the future. What we see now in just the past year of data that's been collected on the OTOF gene is that if children have some change in their hearing status, it means that they become effectively more medically hard of hearing. But those who are receiving gene therapy still need language support and social support. And that psychosocial support is critical for them. This is not a cure. And that is a misunderstanding that many folks have. And when we're talking about policy and ethics here and making sure that this is being supported, we need to make sure we're prioritizing these children's language and psychosocial abilities.
Yeah, and I think that really gets to the point of even the example with Assam, who was an 11-year-old boy who had no hearing whatsoever, and then all of a sudden he was able to hear, and his brain wasn't able to process sound as a normal child would if they were born hearing. I think that there's a window there that's up into the age of 5 that then the experiences are very different after that point, especially if you're to restore their hearing. Now, my next question is for Dr. Braun. I know that there are different types of gene therapy. There's something that's called somatic gene editing, but there's also the germline gene editing. So can you talk about the distinction there? I think it's important that we all understand the difference as it relates to this topic. So Dr. Braun?
Thank you so much for raising that issue. There's a huge difference between the two approaches, and the ethics around those approaches are two completely separate issues as well. When it comes to somatic gene editing, that is using gene therapy to fix the genes in an adult individual who has some type of limitation to a body part. So in the most recent clinical trials, they were injecting gene editing into the ear in order to fix the individual. And that was the impact that was seen through that trial. Children, if they were to have children, they would still potentially genetically be deaf. So that is the somatic approach, and those views around that type of treatment typically are similar to those of cochlear implants. You see improvements, but you wouldn't see that gene passed on. Now, germline is a completely different approach, and with the technology that we have for gene editing, this would be something that we would try first with IVF, which is also a very controversial treatment in Alabama currently. They are working on a gene editing process of an embryo, and then they would implant that into an individual, and that gene would be altered forever. Their future children and offspring would also be affected. So the ethics around both of these processes are completely different.
Thank you, Dr. Braun. So let me ask you, based on your research and thinking about the distinction here that you've just explained, do you feel that, or even know that, with the Russian scientist who had claimed, I think initially, that they were able to edit this gene, about whether or not that's happened or not? I mean, that was what was claimed in terms of there being this germline gene editing that took place. So can you talk more about that?
China just, in fact, successfully did it as well. When it came to the germline therapy for IVF, for HIV/AIDS. They proved that there was some resistance there. It's called, they had a problem with mosaicism. And that is one of the dangers of proceeding forward with these types of technologies before we're necessarily ready as a society. It requires a lab and hospital setting in order to do, but it's not necessarily a difficult process. And what we see happening in other countries, internationally across the world, they won't participate in that, but you may see things happening in private labs in other countries, let's say, or underground labs. That type of technology is not challenging to successfully use.
Great, thank you. Now moving on, or going back to Dr. Brian Greenwald, can you talk about the impact of eugenics on deaf people? You know, even looking at that from a historical lens, what's been that impact?
So now, thinking about this in relation to the comments my colleagues have had here, the idea of a cure has been one that's been around for thousands of years. It's not a modern notion. And there are old world medicines and faith healers that we've all been subjected to throughout history. And we could talk a great deal about that. For example, some of the old world medicines in the 1800s included such things as, people trying to mix deer blood with chicken blood and pour that in a libation into the ear, or taking onions, squeezing the juice of an onion and mixing that with ant eggs and seeing what happens when that's poured into the ear. And there have been many such attempts. And also attempts to use hot oil and pour it into the ear. And these are some of the old world cures, so-called cures there. And these were coming until the mid 20th century. And then they were trying methods of taking someone on airplane rides that rapidly shifted altitude and made their ears pop to see if that might cure them. And then in more recent history, Japri Virdi worked on a cure for deafness, and they were using a number of different techniques. Some of these included electroshock therapies and magnets and things like this. And so up to this point, we haven't seen any of these methods reach any success. But they've been attempted for a very long time. And of course, we see the examples of Nazi Germany sterilizing vast populations, targeting deaf people in particular for sterilization and elimination. The sterilization laws weren't unique to Germany, but actually also were passed in Japan and Scandinavian countries. For example, I think Finland had one that prohibited deaf people marrying one another in conjunction with their sterilization laws. And of course, America also has a history of sterilization laws being passed. And specifically with the goal of eradicating deaf people. Now, I would have to say that I think that is a reflection of attitudes of the societies of those days. And it
Most
says
definitely,
something
yeah.
about what people believe to be true about deaf people.
Right.
People are obsessed with this idea of eliminating deafness.
So why do you think that is? Why is there this obsession with eliminating or eradicating deaf people?
There seems to be some level of fascination with deaf people on the whole. And there's no singular point that I could direct you to, but there is a point at which these ideas became very famous, and that's in the early 1800s, 18th century, with Alexander Graham Bell. And he was not alone in this involvement and interest in eradicating deafness and deaf people, but he played a huge role because he had a giant platform, through his lectures and writings and such. Bell was, in my mind, obsessed with deaf people throughout his life. And I find it odd, and perhaps my colleague Derek might know more to speak to on this issue, but I'm not sure, equating a deaf person with somebody that has a horrendous disease, I don't think these are on par, and you might have something more to say about that. Derek?
I'd love to add to what Dr. Grinwald just said. I do agree with you. There's an online database that anyone can look at called OMIM, O-M-I-M, and it's an online database of genetic disorders that are listed. There are several thousand there, and these are the ones that have been found in humans over time, and many of those diseases are absolutely horrific. A lot of viability isn't past the age of 3. These people suffer in a very intense way, and in that database, if you were to review it yourself, deaf plus individuals were included, which I find interesting. And I've talked to friends and colleagues, and I know that deaf plus individuals are very happy, successful people. And why there's an obsession with the eradication of deafness is an interesting topic.
So Brian, you said something earlier about deaf individuals or people with a disability being undesirable. There's a perception that they're seen as being less than, undesirable. And I think, too, that for quite some time, and maybe less so nowadays, but not being able to speak or use your voice, you were then seen as being not less than human. So I'm just curious now, too, with Dr. Braun, with your view as a geneticist, just thinking about what it means to be human then. Can you provide us insight on that? I know it's a deep question.
Wow. Your comments around if you cannot speak, it means you are not human. I think that comes from Plato or from another individual, a philosopher. I would have to ask the philosopher here on the team to be able to remark on that. But I believe it was a Greek philosopher. And I don't know that I could speak intellectually on that, but it does make sense. The idea of being unable to speak, meaning that you are not intellectual, but calling an entire population of people and the evolution of genetics. We know that genetics change over time. And for any group, be that animals, plants, whatever it is, you continue to survive through millions of years because of diversity, because of gene diversity. So those types of history, when it comes to our genes, the research shows us and is pretty strong and suggests that connection 26 may give us a resistance to other diseases. It's not been 100% proven yet, but it also hasn't been disproven. So there's the question still lying there. That diversity and diversity of genes are important to us.
Interesting. Anything to add to that, Dr. Blankmeyer-Burke? What does it mean to be human then?
I will reserve my comments on Plato and Aristotle maybe until next fall. We can talk more about that. But to respond back to the concept of language and reason, I'd like to go back to our thoughts on framing, and especially thinking about this from an ethical perspective. As someone trained in philosophy and ethics, it's important for us to talk about what is considered the good or the harm to a given action. And hearing people's obsession with deaf people is based on their own assumptions and their assumptions about the deaf experience and what that means. And the assumption is that we are experiencing more harm than other people. I would propose, though, that the harm that deaf people experience generally is due to societal attitudes and the way that society is structured that puts us on unequal footing, that does not include us, that takes away from our experience of equality. And if we are to focus on the negative or the pain or harm that deaf people experience, that is a given frame that can be used. But I would counter with a different frame. Many of you are familiar with the concept of deaf gain. There are other approaches along these lines as well, but the idea that deaf people can flourish. And deaf flourishing means that we can live good lives. We can remove barriers. We can create laws and have society recognize us and the languages that we use. And that's the ethical context I'm using for this conversation. One way to quote unquote solve the problem of deaf people is to fix us, but the other is to challenge and transform society in a way to see us differently. And I think that the latter approach is one that would be more beneficial to humanity and would be true in the future as well.
Right, and having a more diverse world and not a homogenous one, right? All right. So the next question is to Dr. Brian Greenwald. And I know you started to talk about this already, but maybe if you could elaborate further. I mean, I had the honor to attend your class last year. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed that experience and seeing you present on Alexander Graham Bell. You were talking about eugenics and the decisions that A.G. Bell made. You presented it in a very factual way, and I was just completely astonished with all that you shared. Can you talk more about what his vision was about deaf people not being able to marry other deaf individuals to be able to prevent having deaf offspring? Can you talk more about that part of our history?
Oh, yes. First of all, thank you so much for coming to my class. Thank you. Now, your question is an interesting one because when we talk about Alexander Graham Bell, he was married to a deaf woman named Mabel Hubbard. And Mabel was 28 and 18, and he was 28, correction. And just in general, it seems that they had a long and fruitful marriage together. They were very happy and had a strong partnership. They were married for more than 50 years. Now, Mabel is a very interesting case because she did not want to associate with other deaf people. But Bell continued his association with deaf people throughout his life. And in fact, he was very involved in the eugenics movement while they were married. And Bell was involved very much with the Americans' eugenics movement, and that organization found widespread footing. He went to their annual meetings and conferences. There was a great deal of debate during this time. When eugenics was very widespread in the U.S., we also had the race improvement conferences and better baby competitions and so forth. And Bell is mostly famed for his presentation and publication, Memoirs on Formation of a Deaf Variety of the Human Race. Now, that presentation came about in 1883. And that presentation was really a mixture of a discussion on how we could stop deaf communities from proliferating, because he had a great deal of fear that if deaf people continued to marry one another, we would create a new deaf race. And this is at a time when America was facing a great deal of social problems. And the idea of adding another deaf race into the mix was just a line too far. And so he wanted to stop that from happening. Now, he was very interested in marriage and genetics at the time, and was advocating for the prohibition of signing as well, and promoting a method of oralism. So all these things are happening in tandem. But in his memoir, he describes this idea of the proliferation of a deaf race as a great calamity. So he clearly defines it as a problem. If deaf people are to continue to marry deaf people, they will breed nothing but disaster. And he was looking to solve this problem. But Bell, in his arguments, used a lot of social pressures to hammer his points home and prevent deaf people from marrying, even though he married a deaf woman. And he thought that his marriage as a hearing person to a deaf woman was the ideal model of what deaf people ought to do. And it seems to me, again, that Bell was, I must say, obsessed with finding a way to fix or solve the deaf problem through marriages, through applications of oralism, banning sign language, and with the intent, I assume, of eliminating the deaf culture and the deaf community. And yet, for me, Bell's constant, lifelong obsession with this seems to have made him either be unwilling or unable to accept his own connection to this lineage.
So do you happen to know how successful he was with preventing deaf marriages? I mean, I assume that it still happened anyway, but do you know?
Well, of course, we know that a deaf variety of the human race has not happened in the way he feared. But statistically, I'm sure Derek can talk a little more about this, but most deaf adults end up marrying and having children. They're generally hearing children. So there's less of a genetic threat than he feared. But deaf people have always continued to resist these ideas. Deaf people still married deaf people then, still do today.
If I may add just two things quickly. I'd love to add to your statistics. Most deaf children actually come from hearing parents, and that is true then, and it is true today. To add to Bell's idea about intermarrying amongst the deaf community, It was not encouraged because he thought it would grow the number of deaf people. And it does show up in genetic literature and scientific literature still today that that's a pervasive belief. There are some recent papers that were published about the idea that deaf people produce deaf children. So not much has changed over the last 100 or so years.
If I may add to that as well, I'm often contacted by IVF clinics, hospitals, or other medical ethics committees because they will have situations where a deaf couple will come to them and want to have a deaf child. And they are concerned about the ethics around this. So I'm brought in to have conversations with them. It is complicated, as generally most parents would like to see children who are similar to themselves. In addition to that, most parents would also like to see their children have good lives. And good can be defined in a number of ways. But when we think about the idea of parents making a choice about the type of children they have, this is incredibly complicated and controversial. One perspective is that when a person is deaf and they have lived the experience of being a deaf person and they have a good life, they want to be able to share that good life with their children. So one question comes to the ethics or morality of being able to use specific technology that is technically neutral, but to apply that technology in a way that you will experience values and then identities showing up in a specific way. And so the way we use technology affects our experience, but that is because of the bias and values that we have. And in a pluralist society, there are multiple perspectives on how it should be used.
Thank you. And I think that that brings it back to what Brian was talking about earlier, about the sterilization laws that had happened. But it seems like that didn't include deaf individuals, and they weren't a part of those, the final analysis of those laws ultimately. So what was the change that then deaf people were not included in those laws?
Okay, to be clear, outside of the U.S., deaf people were sterilized. This happened a great deal in Nazi Germany, it happened in Japan, it happened in Finland and other countries. So it did indeed. But here in America, it was a bit of an outlier. Because the first state to pass sterilization laws was Indiana in 1907. And then a number of states in rapid succession did so up until the 30s. And so many states passed these sterilization laws. Now, in the final laws that were passed, we never saw deaf people mentioned in these laws. Now, I find this to be a fascinating question. Why? Many states that adopted these sterilization laws used Harry Laughlin's reasoning. Harry was a strong advocate of eugenics and specifically sterilization policies. And so he wrote many of the model laws that the other eventual laws were modeled after. And so if a state wanted to do a sterilization law, then many, not all of them, but many used his frameworks. And Laughlin listed 9 categories of defectives, as he called them. Blind people, people with mental infirmity and insanity and so forth. And he said these were conditions for sterilization. And he identified deaf people in that list, but somehow they weren't eventually included in these laws. And I think it's important to ask this question because it tells us something about the attitudes of those who were advocating sterilization and the attitudes of the policymakers of the day and what deaf communities were doing. I'm not sure that there was a lot of ethical consideration taken at the time, perhaps, but I doubt it, I would say. And so this model, I think, shows that some ignorance of those ethical considerations. But in the end, why were deaf people not included in these laws? I have a few thoughts on this, and these are not firmly rooted, written in stone yet. But when we look here at the American deaf community, it has always shown itself to be capable, intelligent, employable, responsible, tax-paying citizens. And they have long been able to advocate for themselves through national organizations, local and state organizations, the National Association of the Deaf being one. Secondly, historically, there was this one person, Arlene Duckman, who in her book on people with diabetes and the history of people with diabetes makes an argument about people with diabetes in the past were a great concern for eugenicists. Some of them were targeted because they had these health problems and illnesses and were unemployable at the time. And so there was some thought of sterilizing them. And then with the advent of insulin and injectable insulin in 1922, 1923, we started to have injectable insulin to be able to treat people with diabetes. Suddenly, they were able to go to work and be robust and live good lives. And so they got together and argued, wait a second, we have treatment, we have medicine that works, we're employable. And so it seems that the eugenicists said, okay, we'll leave them alone at this point. Now, I think another idea that Derek could speak to more is the notion of transmission of hereditary deafness. At that time, was not something they could have known. Now we know when a child is born, we know, a day later we can find out that your child has failed the hearing test or whatever you want to say about that. We can identify this very quickly. Back then, it couldn't really be known as quickly. So this created some problems for those who were proponents of eugenics. Was that person born deaf? Did they become deaf and acquire deafness later? That was a difficult thing to parse. And I think that the NAD and other organizations were watching vigilantly as these state laws were passed. Now, whether NAD had some impact there is really kind of a mixed bag historically. Because NAD has passed their platform that said they encouraged deaf people not to marry at one point.
In the 1920s.
In the 1920s, that was part of their platform. And the NAD said that deaf people could self-regulate their communities. Yeah.
To respond to that, it's fascinating to think about the historical context and then more recent policies as well. And thinking back to 2006, 2007, in England, a law was passed that was talking about human fertilization and embryos, and the Human Fertilization and Embryo Act specifically was talking about who could get access to IVF. And I am explaining this as succinctly as I can. But they have a national health care system, and health care is free to most individuals. And as such, they're able to set up rules and regulations that make decisions for most of the country. And these regulations had a direct impact on the deaf community. And there were a group of folks internationally who were deaf and keeping an eye on this because there were deep concerns about this law discriminating against deaf people. If hearing people were able to get access to IVF in order at no cost, then in order to have children, then people with disabilities and deaf people wanted to be able to do the same thing and have a 100% chance that they would have a deaf child, but that was not permitted. There was a global discussion about this concept. There were a number of meetings, and eventually, at the termination of the discussion, the law had a footnote that was placed that made an exemption for deaf people and explicitly said that deaf people could not be discriminated against in IVF. So even 100 years later, we are seeing deaf communities partnering with each other, even from one country to another, in order to support the ability to have deaf children. So it is interesting and empowering to see how much our deaf community is connected.
Thank you for sharing that. I have a follow-up question for you. This is more of a philosophical question. So if you have a gene that's edited out, does the person, do they stay the same, or is there an impact that one experiences when a gene is edited out? Does it change who they are?
That's a difficult question to answer. My PhD dissertation was about the question of if it was ethical for deaf people to choose to have deaf children using gene technologies. This was back in 2011. But it is something that is still applicable today. And it's something that I've been thinking about for decades. I have a few thoughts. In our lives as humans, we will nearly always experience something that transforms us. Many folks, maybe including the folks here, may have grown up with oralism, using spoken language, and then once we met another deaf person, that changed the way that we use language. We may have chosen to use ASL. That's a transformative experience. Now, your question is about physical transformation, but I do think it's important when we talk about transformation to not ignore the other experiences we may have that create transformation. In my dissertation, I wrote about a specific concept. And the idea of having body integrity, and the idea that we can have bodily integrity. And so folks may, of course, have different responses at different times. And in the case of life-threatening situations, we may have a different response. But the idea is that when a baby is born, that the body that they inhabit is their own. Now, when we think about this and the concept of genomic integrity, and we think about the idea of fertilization of an egg and a sperm, and we think about the genetic content that's there, and when we think about things like IVF, but ultimately the experience of being born, if we think about what it is for an individual to have their genes changed in utero, if it is an embryo that has a change in the genomic integrity, at what point does that embryo have rights and bodily integrity? And that's a complicated question. But a genome in and of itself is not a person, although in society we are having highly controversial and sensitive conversations around the concept of personhood, and I am well aware of this. There is a discussion happening in the Supreme Court about this very issue right now. But I also want to talk about our sense of when there is an ethical responsibility or an ethically appropriate time to change a person, and at what point they are human in the ways that we can impact them or not. When we have a fertilized egg, we have not as a society decided whether or not that is a person or not, and we have laws on the books that sometimes say that a fertilized egg is a person, that others are not, that's another issue. But I want to talk about separately, but also similarly, the ethical issue of if we should be permitted to make changes to this embryo. And if so, what types of changes are ethically permissible? And that is true for an embryo, a fetus, and a child. We have a range of human experiences, and we have to think about what it means to change the genes of an individual and when that individual should be able to choose when those changes happen. And is it before they become a potential person, or when they are a person but not able yet to make a decision on their own? We have to think about what is reasonable and what is an appropriate argument. And there are very deep, complex ethical issues around all of this. If you'd like to know more, I would encourage you to register for my philosophy course. Sorry, I've got to do a plug here. It will be Wednesday nights this fall. The PHI 450 class. It's a bioethics course. It's bioethics in the deaf community, and we'll be focusing on topics such as this.
I am going to make it a point to visit your class, Dr. Blankmeyer-Burke. Looks like we have to wrap up here, but I would like to ask you all a final question, and we'll have all of you answer this one again. Now, this has been a great discussion of our panelists that bring different backgrounds to this conversation, and just being able to share with the audience. Are we an endangered species? Are we who are here an endangered species? I'll start with you, Dr. Braun.
I'd like to, before I talk about two different approaches and the technological approaches to them, remember somatic gene editing means editing an adult's genes versus germline gene editing, which would affect not only the embryo edited, but their future offspring. So we have to consider the implications of gene therapies. They have about a 50% success rate right now across different deaf spectrums. You see people becoming hard of hearing, comparable to what we see with potential cochlear implants, but it's a 50-50 shot. With the germline, it would fix not only the embryo or the IVF embryo, but also their future offspring. So germline is prohibited internationally right now, but the idea of curing and or eradicating it and eradicating deafness, I think will still happen when it comes to science and therapies, but we have a long way to go before we get to the acceptance of the germline gene editing approach.
Dr. Burke?
When I think about the world and recognizing that some countries have more resources than others, and deaf people's experiences are vastly different depending on the countries in which they grow up in, I think if we're talking about ourselves as an endangered species, I think it's going to depend on where deaf people live. In what is called developing countries, it may be a very different story, as opposed to technically more developed countries that have access to technologies that other countries do not. And I am thinking about the impact on deaf people. And right now, deaf people who have less resources often look to the deaf people who have more resources to lead. If deaf people who have more resources do no longer exist, what will happen for deaf people who are in those developing countries?
Well, considering all of this question, I think about people globally, whether hearing or deaf. There are several existential questions here, and we've talked about some of these recently. Some of these are questions everybody will face, climate change being one. I don't think it's fake news. It's real. It's here. And there is the question of, we can't say what if that happens. It's going to happen. But we can't forecast the future. And, 10 years from now, 70 years from now, I don't know. Will we be here? But there will be some level of difference, as my colleague here has said. What I do know is that historically, there have always been attempts to cure or eliminate deafness. That has always been the case. And the American deaf community, for me, is most remarkable because over the last 200 years and all of those efforts, still we are here. That in itself is important, regardless of the various pressures to accommodate society and so forth. All of those pressures around prohibitions on marriage and the various approaches to get rid of deafness, we yet persist, and that is critical. I continue to believe that deaf communities will navigate this future. As these challenges come up, we will meet them. Now, I would say that this challenge is looming, absolutely. I know that for me, it's not a question of if, but when. I think that question of when, it may be looming far closer than we expect. It may not reach us for many years yet, but I think it's a question we're going to have to address.
Thank you all. I think the role for Gallaudet is to really be an educator and to educate people, to ask more questions, to really promote curiosity and to challenge various ways of thinking. And I think this panel has been important for that reason. It's because when we come together as a community and we talk about these types of issues, there are some small conversations that might be happening in pockets of our community, but we have yet to really convene as a larger community. And I think that, like you said, Dr. Greenwald, it is looming. And I appreciate you all being here today. And I wanted to share with our audience that this is the first of many conversations to come. We will continue this discussion, and when we think about the strategic plan of the university, part of the strategic plan from what we have identified are the 5 grand challenges. And one of those grand challenges is really about noticing and acknowledging the value for what deaf people contribute. And history shows that our worth as deaf individuals has been questioned throughout time. Yet we continue to persist and prove our worth time and time again. You think about major things like even with Beethoven and music, it was proved. And then discovering light with Edison. And then, just there's been so much that has come up in terms of inventions that have come from our community. And the question that I have for all of you before I bring on the debate team is just asking about whether or not deaf people are worth preserving. And if so, how? Why? And what can we do in order to address that going forward? And I'm going to leave that question with you all to continue to think about and reflect on as we engage in this conversation series going forward. With that, I would like to invite up Dr. Brendan Stern and the debate team. And again, I want to have a round of applause for our panelists. You all did a great job. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Good. All ready? All right. Thank you. Thank you. And thank all of you panelists. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Brendan Stern, and I am a proud head coach of the Gallaudet debate team. And before I introduce our debaters, I have a question for all of you. Let me ask you here. If I told you that I had somebody here who said they were the greatest boxer of all time. Now, mind you, they've never boxed anyone before. They've never fought or sparred anyone. What would you say? Would you think that they are ridiculous, right? Right? And you would be right. That's why Gallaudet has the Gallaudet debate team. And that's why the Gallaudet debate team argues difficult questions, like deafness should be cured. It is not until we enter the arena that we can really plumb the value and the quality of the arguments we bring to the debate. Just 2 weeks ago, the Gallaudet debate team had the pleasure of going to Georgetown University to debate that very question. Deafness should be cured. And my favorite memories of that evening were observing the audience, the debaters, the participants, the deaf, hearing, Gallaudet, and Georgetown all gathered together to ask and answer this difficult question. And time and again I saw them say, you know what, I never thought of it that way. Oh, you know what a great idea. That is the beauty that comes of debate. And so we start to winnow out the less convincing and less robust arguments and see those that make more sense and have more value. Now, with that said, I'm going to turn the stage over to something that is my thrill and my honor to present to you. You have a sneak preview, or post view actually, of how our Gallaudet debate team changes hearts and how we did it just 2 weeks ago. Come on up if you would. Okay. Now, because of the constraints of time, I've asked them to reduce their speech time. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with opening arguments of 1.5 minutes from affirmative, 1.5 minutes from negative, and you have one cross-exam question. You have one cross-exam for Joe. You have a 1 minute rebuttal, and you also have a 1 minute rebuttal in closing. Okay? So, Joe is going to be arguing in the affirmative. Deafness should be cured. Okay?
That's right.
And your corner, you had, well, let's see, you're in this corner. We have someone 6'2", weighed 179 pounds, Joe Chiricello.
Hello, everyone.
And in the opposing corner, we have someone 5'9", 170 pounds. We have Trent Mora, who is also our current student body government president and debate team captain. Let the sparring begin. Thank you and good luck.
I'm just going to go ahead and set my timer. I believe that I am going first. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Wow. You all are so brave in your deafness. I'm here to talk about the idea of curing deafness. Okay, so I ask that you come with an open mind and an open heart today. I'm going to start with what Dr. Derek Braun had mentioned. Dr. Burke had mentioned about the idea of gene editing in children. And I want you to envision a world where a deaf child, let's say in America, has to really fight. And they have to fight for things like, let me look at my notes here, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. 95% of hearing parents that have deaf children have met that deaf child is the first deaf person they've met in their life. 95%. 80% of deaf children have cochlear implants. 77% of deaf children are mainstreamed. 72% of hearing parents do not know how to sign. And 70% of those deaf children are language deprived. So they are deprived of language. 70% of deaf children have no access to language, and they do not meet their language milestones between the ages of birth to 8 years old. So here in the United States, that's happening. And I think that we should try to do our best to see what it is that people need. And I'm asking you, imagine that in other countries as well. I think that we should cure deafness. It is a belief of mine. I think we should eradicate this problem, and that will solve the problem of language deprivation.
Okay, let me set my timer now. So before I begin my time, let me just recognize that it's so difficult to sum up these longer speeches into this 1.5 minute format. We had 5 minutes at Georgetown, and that was tough on its own. It's even tougher to condense this to a 1 minute argument, but I'm going to try my best. Okay, deaf people have existed from time immemorial. Throughout history, we have existed. We have documented proof of this. If we are looking at the attempts to cure deafness, this attempt in itself implies that the life and worthiness of deaf people and the value of deaf people is less than that of hearing people. But how can someone calculate this value of a person? Well, how deep and how good their life is? We can look at their genetic potential, but looking at their life worth. I think there's a great deal of challenge here. In fact, there's a number of challenges here, social challenges that come from misperceptions of deaf people. And as evidence of this, I say first look at deaf people when they gather together in schools for the deaf, and we see deaf people gather. They do so like fish in water at last. So the notion that deaf people have a need to be fixed is rebutted as soon as we see deaf people have language. Well, look at how people who are not deaf look at deaf people. That's critical here. Deafness and the idea of deafness is what needs curing here. Doctors, educators, parents, and deaf people can become doctors, parents, Olympians, and so forth. So what is it that we, instead of thinking, what can we do for deaf people, what can deaf people's language do for us and do for the world, is the question we should be asking instead.
I'm going to ask a question now. My question for you is, if a cure were to come up, what would that look like in your world?
So that would mean there's less biodiversity in the world, that what it means to be a human and the variation in that expression would be lessened. The human experience as a whole would be lessened because of the loss of what it is to be deaf and signing. And the knowledge of that experience also would be gone, and that would be a dearth in the world. So now my question for you, okay? So what causes language deprivation for deaf children?
As I mentioned, 82% of parents do not know sign language, and they are meeting for the first time a deaf person when they have a deaf child, and so communication is not happening at an early age. How are they preparing to have a deaf child? I think that we'll see change potentially with the advancements of technologies, but you have 9 months to learn a language, and that is a short period of time, whereas some people may have a range of access to sound and hearing. We have to think about what's available to them, and if a person does not know how to sign or cannot pick up sign language in 9 months, then that has a severe impact to the child.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now closing arguments.
Okay, I'll start. I wanted to let all of you know that you are the lucky ones. You have access to language. You made it to a place where you can express yourself. You can debate with others. You may become a lawyer, a doctor, anything that you want to be. So you are lucky. You are the lucky ones, because that is not the common experience of deaf people, to be able to achieve their dreams. Because of the language deprivation at an early age, it becomes a day-to-day struggle to even enunciate what they want. So I want you to think about the real possibility of a systemic change. Will they embrace deaf people? Will they embrace deafness when 99% of us are ignored? 99% of deaf people struggle on a daily basis. They suffer in silence. So what do you think? Should we embrace deafness for all of the benefits? I think that that's up to you as a question, but I would challenge you as my fellow debater. The idea of curing deafness may improve the quality of life for all in the long term, and not rely on interpreters any longer, not have to struggle any longer, but to be like everyone else. And that is my time. Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute closing, right?
Correct.
Oh. Okay, my opponent here has said to us today that language deprivation is caused by hearing people and by society, and that our society cannot accommodate deaf people. And so at heart in this debate is something I think is important to remind you of. In the 1880s, they had the Milan Conference, and one man, Alexander Graham Bell, took the stage there and convinced throngs of people that his way was truth, and deaf people ought not be taught sign language. And the result of that was, throughout Europe and much of the Western world, we saw deaf teachers replaced across the board with hearing teachers favoring oralism. And so if somebody was signing, they were punished. Their hands were whacked with a ruler, and they were put in pain and suffering because of it. These are people actively taking a role in society to prevent deaf people from flourishing with sign language, preventing deaf people from signing with one another. That set us back by hundreds of years, that effort. So when we think about language deprivation, I want you to think about this kind of actively inhibiting and oppressive systems. Thank you, and with that, that's my time. So,
Ooh, that was hard to get done in the short time that we had, but I hope that you enjoyed our debate.
it was indeed. Thank you very much.
All right. Our students are awesome, aren't they? Round of applause for both of them. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. And thank you all for coming today. Thank you for being here. To the audience who's been watching us here in person or via the live stream, I know that this is going to be posted on the website. It will be at the GU Live website, so you can find that there, and it will be edited and then posted for people to view after today. Again, thank you all for coming, and have a great day.